Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the March 7th, 2018 edition of the YourLIVINGBrand.live show. My name is Ben Baker, and my company is Your Brand Marketing. Now, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, what do? We work with our clients on brand, message, market, vision, and value. We consult, we do workshops, and we speak on figuring out who you are, what you do, why you do it, who you do it for, and why people should care. And that's what this show is all about. It's figuring out what makes companies unique, what makes them special, what makes them different. Why should their customers care? Why and how you can keep from being a commodity. You know, every business has something that's unique. Every business has something that's different about them. Every business has a unique audience that is interested in what they do, why they do it, and want to champion their brand. It's a matter of being able to communicate with them, allow them to be your champions, and build a loyal following. And that's what this show is all about. Now, every week, what do? We interview another guest. And we have a special guest to you today coming to you from Chicago. Her name is Stefanie Frank. She's a neuroscientist. And she works with companies and she works with educators to be able to believe in mindset and mindfulness within the education system, and how she helps the next generation be better, understand who they are, what they do, and how they can communicate their value moving forward. So let's bring Stefanie on board. You know, it's recorded, but you know what? You're going to enjoy it. And I will be back after the message. So, Stefanie, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for taking the time for being with us this morning.
No problem. My pleasure.
Now, you're coming to us live from Chicago, right?
Yes, I'm in Chicago, but in a little suburb called Oak Park. So
nice.
It's like very close to get to the city, but it's still nice and quiet here. Perfect.
I love Chicago. It's one of my favorite towns. You know, whenever I come to visit, I got to come back so you and I can visit live, because it's one of my favorite places to come and visit.
Yeah, I love it. I love it here. I've lived in many cities in my life, and this is one of my favorites. So
yeah, great town for culture, great town for museums. You know, Millennium Park, everything. It's definitely a place I love coming to visit.
Yeah.
So, as I tell my guests, is every week what we do is we talk to another guest. We sit there and say, what makes you different? What makes you unique? What makes you special? What are the things that you do that are different in your industry, you know, that people resonate with, and you're able to help a niche pocket of people and be able to make their lives easier and better. So tell me your story. Tell me, Stefanie, tell me what you do. Tell me about Zarif. Tell me about, the types of things that you do for people.
Yeah. So where I'm at right now in my career is really helping people understand the science of learning and how we promote like our optimal brain growth and brain development through learning. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I do, my niche, is that I break down a lot of the complex research that's being done by some of the big schools like Harvard Center for Developing Child and Stanford. And I break it down into language that makes it very applicable to different organizations. So schools are a big one for me, university departments, education departments. They really want to understand the mechanics of learning. Right. And even tech companies like Google, and I did a talk in Berlin recently. So people that are trying to understand innovation, but also in the kind of concept, within the concept of how do we actually learn, and right. How do we promote learning? So yeah, so a big part of what I do is that. And the other piece that sets me apart, so the science piece, and the science is really the focus of my mm-hmm. work, is trying to get people more fluent in the language that is used by the neuroscience researchers and things like that. But the other piece that's really important to me is something called psychological safety in general, and the concept of using different mechanisms, particularly our ability to socially co-regulate with other people, and how right. our interactions with other people can alter and are dependent on our inner state, our inner physiology. So there's a bit of the social intelligence piece linked in with it, and the real mechanics of learning and how that happens.
So a lot of what you do, breaks down to being almost like an interpreter. Because there's a lot of, I sit there and I remember, going through dissertations and reading all this complex, and phenomenal and interesting material in university. Yeah. And, probably understanding 40% of what these people are really saying. Yeah. It's such at a high level, and it's so complex that a lot of it, unfortunately, in its original, platform, is unintelligible to the masses, and therefore it's not applicable. Yeah. So having someone who can actually take that information and make that information accessible to people and applicable is a huge advantage.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's what I'm doing. So, and there's two pieces that I think I bring. One is that I'm able to bring it into a language that's really applicable. And part of that comes from, I have really, really diverse experience. So working as a school counselor, but also as an intelligence analyst for the Department of Defense and doing pattern recognition and data analysis, to working in lots of nonprofits, doing different kind of consulting. So I have that kind of diverse perspective, which allows to be able to find a language and a way to translate it into what's applicable for the audiences. But the other piece too, because I think this is a danger that happens, is there is a lot of people who are talking about the neuroscience, but they don't actually really go deep into the research. They read a news article that has a flashy headline, a lot of neuroscience, a lot of scientific research, that someone will find some little catchy soundbite and then promote that, and that goes viral on the internet, but it doesn't actually even reflect the depth of the research. Sure. And so a lot of people are kind of propagating stuff that isn't really all that true to science. And there is also a lot of even what you could call neuroscience research that isn't that rigorous. And for me, something that I really try to bring into my work is taking the slightly harder sciences, so real biology and physiology, and people that are actually really testing things that are very, very measurable and concrete, not just studies that were done on university students and then trying to apply that to all of the population. So I'm trying to bring some of that rigor, and that piece comes from my experience working in an MRI lab, where I did work on, putting electrodes on people and measuring brain waves, but also like real physiology, like muscle movement and stuff like that. So I think I also have a little bit of an edge from some of the people that are just reading neuroscience and then talking about neuroscience and acting as though they have that depth. And I think that's the other niche, is that I'm able to, because I was in that environment and did my own studies, there's a fluency that I think I have to the language that helps people understand the deeper, truer part of the science. That's not just catchphrases and buzzwords.
Well, because you've been in the industry, because you've actually been there from the research point of view, you understand the mentality of the people, of what they're going through day by day. And so when you're doing this, for lack of a better word, translation work, are you just reading people's articles, or are you actually going out there and talking to the actual researchers and diving in a little deeper and understanding their methodology and things like that? So, when you're able to dissect it, you're not just getting what's on the piece of paper, but you're getting the thought process behind it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do a bit of both. If I do, let's say, come across some research that's interesting, I don't take one study. I take multiple textbooks and huge compilations of research that show opposing views, also, like any kind of contradictory evidence, looking for patterns among that, and then also talking to the people that are the source of it. And so just, from my connections from New York University, where I was working, just pulling a lot from those studies that we were conducting. So I was a part of many different research studies there. So taking stuff from that and using it to apply to this, because really the science of learning, learning is not new. Learning has been around for a long time, and there's been a lot of stuff that's been done on it. So yeah, it's a combination of all of that. But I definitely would say I think you labeled it really well. Like it is translation. I think that's a big part of what I'm doing. And I think one of my favorite things to do is to find patterns, to look what are some things that all of these different disciplines have in common. And even from, I studied with meditation masters and in monasteries and spent months in different ones to kind of look at how they process the meditation practice. So I'm trying to pull from many, many different, really, really highly diverse disciplines to try and find these patterns to apply to people. So
you started all this when you were 5, right? Because you're not that old.
Well,
to have all this experience, I mean, you must have started when you were like 5.
I know. I think I'm hopefully look younger than I am.
There we go. Well, we'll let the audience attest to that. So.
But yeah, I mean, I just had a voracious appetite for my dad had a really interesting journey. So I was born in Canada, but he was born in Germany and ended up leaving when he was pretty young, like 17, moving to South Africa, becoming a welder, then hitchhiking on shipping boats all the way around the entire continent to Brazil, and then hitchhiking from the Patagonia, South America, all the way up to the middle of Canada, and then heard about the cowboys and went west to Calgary. So I think I got that kind of,
wanderlust.
Yeah, exactly. So, and from a pretty young age, I left home and I lived in so many different cities. I lived in Europe, Denmark and Belgium, Las Vegas, New York. So, Africa, Latin America, spent a lot of time in Latin America. So, I think that that almost has part of the translation piece. And my earliest experiences were actually in language. And it's interesting how a lot of what I'm looking at now has a lot to do with our language. So our inner language, the words we say to ourselves, we learn our speak. We learn how our inner speech is really, really linked to what we heard when we were in our earliest environments.
Right.
And we're only exposed to, a very few number of perspectives of who we are that we are being fed. So we learn language in many different ways. We learn an inner language. We learn how to engage also based on our earliest environments. And all of those abilities, those language abilities, really relate to how we're able to, push through challenges, how we interpret failure, how we interpret self-worth. So it's been an interesting journey because it started with literal language, like teaching. I was teaching French, and the other advantage I think I have in terms of that ability is I learned French as a second language and became fluent, and then was able to teach it really well because it's not something that it wasn't natural. I wasn't born speaking it. So I had to figure out a real step-by-step mechanic of how you learn a language and actually eliminate your English accent and move your mouth in a certain way. So I think that's, I apply all of that to what I do now, which is what it's like to be a beginner who's trying to understand a concept and what it takes to really understand concepts. Yeah.
Well, what do they say? To truly understand something, you need to be able to teach it.
Yes.
If you can't teach something, you truly don't understand it.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of it is to be able to take a concept and be able to teach it. So let's take that thought and move forward. Let's talk about you said that you work a lot with the education system, and that these are a lot of your clients. How do you walk me through the type of work that you would do for a school board or a school district? And, what would be the problem that they would come to you with, and how would you help them work through it?
That's a good question. So it's funny. I think a lot of people have a hard time defining what the problem is. I think they're drawn to my work based on one concept that's becoming pretty popular, and it's the concept of growth mindset. And it's something that reflects neuroscience research that's been happening for a very, very long time, but Carol Dweck from Stanford, she made the term really popular. She put
Sorry,
out a book
say
called
this term one more time. You broke up.
Yes, growth mindset.
Growth mindset. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So she made that term popular in recent years. She published a book called Mindset, and it really started to take off. And it's this concept that growth mindset is a belief that people are. Well, actually, let me explain the contrast first. The contrast of that is fixed mindset, is when people believe that our talent or intelligence or potential, we only get certain amounts of it that we're born with, and that's all we get, and we can never expand or develop it. And growth mindset is the belief, actually the true understanding of that our potential and abilities and talents and intelligence and all of those things can be developed over time with the right processes and support and strategies and effort and perseverance. So what it's taking off in education circles because one big reason is that the research is really, really compelling. There's been just massive amounts of research that are showing that when students when they do well in school and they are able to, complete high school and then enter college and complete college, the underlying factor underneath the students that do that, go onto that trajectory, and the ones that don't, the ones that drop out, is their mindset. And the mindset is the influencer of the behaviors. The behaviors matter. The actual movement and action matters, but there's a mindset underneath that drives those behaviors. And so we're able to, in a lot of the research we see, we're able to actually teach students by reminding them of how the brain works, that the brain is a muscle that grows with use it, that when they're reminded of that or let known about that, it changes their mindset. It changes how they see intelligence, and it gives them a new framework to start persevering at their challenges. And so a lot of the schools and education, the districts and principals that come to me, they want to, so there's been a bit of a shift. So I originally was doing a lot of brain workshops for students and for kids. But what I found was that that was wonderful, and kids would get all really inspired, and they would learn about things like self-regulation, like how to regulate our own stress levels. But then I knew, because I was also telling the parents and teachers, that they were going into a classroom or back home where the adult in the room was really not able to regulate their own stress, was labeling and stereotyping and shutting kids down. With a very rigid mindset. So I just
so they're learning one thing in school and then coming home to a completely different scenario.
Exactly. So, and it depends on the teacher. Some teachers have, are very growth oriented and really believe in that kind of potential to develop everything, and some don't. So that's when I started going, to teachers and principals and parents and trying to go to higher and higher levels of that. And so the interesting kind of shift that happened a few years ago for me was I was getting teachers asking me to come in and do workshops for the students. And I started to just see this big contrast that the principals that were asking me to do it for the students, there was an atmosphere in the school where what I felt was that adults were saying, fix our kids. They need an attitude adjustment. And the very fact that I see it as the students being the problem was often a red flag, because what I would see just really harsh language from administrators and teachers to the students, like really punitive, angry, judgmental language. I would hear it being yelled in the hallways and students. So what I started to do was shift my policy, and I now really only do workshops for teacher development or education staff development, because I think that the mindsets of the adults matter a lot. Doesn't mean that the kids can't learn that too, but I think that if they are surrounded by too many adults with these fixed mindsets and stereotyping and very punitive practices, that the students, and we actually have some of that research too, that even students that may have initially a growth mindset, once they're in the presence of a teacher as a fixed mindset, their behavior starts to slump down again. So now the beautiful part is that I'm attracting the principals who understand that. who know that they also have learning to do. And these leaders, like the best that we see in the research too, the best teachers and leaders are the best learners. So the
Sure.
teachers, leaders who are constantly trying to learn new things, they're the ones that are able to show the biggest impact. So what's cool is I'm attracting those people because they're searching growth mindset, which means they're really interested in it. They believe in it. They come to me, and that's really the word, I think, the most common word that gets them drawn into my work. But then the piece that I think a lot of them have told me is missing is that growth mindset's being talked about as this concept that is wonderful. And even the book itself, the mindset book, really builds up an amazing argument for it. But then a lot of people are left with not sure how to implement it. And a lot of people really want to hear the science behind it because it helps them realize it. So that's the piece that I bring in. They are really excited about growth mindset, but they want something more concrete and tangible. And so that's what I bring in. And it's been really fun to be able to attract those kinds of educational leaders.
It's interesting because a couple of weeks ago we had Fiona Douglas Crampton on there from the Dalai Lama Society.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, you could see a previous episode, and what she talks about. They do I'm going to get wrong. It's a health, mind, and body conference every February, and what they do is their same philosophy. It's lifelong learning. But their philosophy is if you can give the parents the skills, they'll teach the kids. But it's all about giving the parents the ability to be able to, I hate to use the word manage the kids, but to give them the tools to be able to help the kids be better and be better human beings. And it sounds like it's a very similar philosophy.
Yes, it's really becoming a very prominent part of my work, which is that our earliest environment, and specifically our earliest language environment, is so foundational for the rest of our lives. And that includes what happens when we're in the womb, the stress levels of our mom. We take in her stress hormones through the amniotic fluid when and that actually
so that's my problem.
Brain but that also, but luckily, babies' brains are so malleable that the environment that happens after the womb can have really dramatic effects on the baby if it's a nurturing, a really nurturing, caretaking environment. And yeah, exactly what she's saying. Like what the parents do, which is why for me it's going to higher and higher levels of policy, because if the parents that are in charge of the next generation have to work 3 jobs because they only make $8 an hour, and so they're never there, or they're so stressed because, like, even just we see even in terms of if you're not able to afford rent or groceries, or there's something that you can't afford that month, it takes so much computational power in your brain that it's very hard to socially engage with your children.
Absolutely.
And we have pretty hard evidence now that the level of social engagement, so facial expressions, the vocalization of the mom and dad, how it's called prosody of voice, the variability of their voice, has huge impact on nervous system, like actual neural development of these specific cranial nerves in children, which are the nerves that actually affect their later ability to read emotions, express emotions, communicate in ways that create safety with others, and actually slow down their heart rate and calm their inner physiology. So it's this thing called co-regulation and self-regulation, and it has a lot to do with how we speak, how much we speak. And we also see huge differences in how many words are spoken in our early language environment and how that affects the brain later. So the parents, it's a huge part of what needs to happen is coming to the parents. But again, not saying that parents that especially are in low socioeconomic status environments, if they are stressed out from all of that, we can't expect them to be engaging with their students if they're working 3 jobs, if they're stressed out. So policy needs to start supporting those parents and the children coming from those environments in order to really create change, especially in the areas, but in all areas, in all status.
Well, I was about to say, I mean, you also get the mid-level manager who's, been promised a 40-hour-a-week job and is at the office 70 hours a week, and also being expected to do stuff on the weekends. It's really difficult to engage with your family when you're always on your phone or you're always on the computer.
Exactly. That's a huge point too, is the stress that even any person who's employed, right, or working at starting a business, how many hours need to go into that, which are subtracted from engagement with the kid. And then on top of that, the highly, highly addictive nature of technology, which is being designed very specifically to, in terms of the attention economy, that they need our attention to be on the screen in order to survive. They're coming up with everything to keep us off, to keep us on their screens, which means that that is less of that social engagement with the children. So it affects absolutely everybody, and it's being amplified now even more by technology. So these early, especially the early environment, but the other piece of that is that it doesn't mean that we write people off if they didn't get what they needed from the early environment, because the brain is so plastic, so malleable. It might take stronger strategies and more rigorous work, but the brain can always be trained and retrained. So high school students, for example, cannot be written off just because they didn't get the early language environment. And there's, a lot of work on how powerful we can, some of the stuff that works with high school students to adults to seniors, that when they understand how the brain works and how malleable it is, it can give them like an extra boost of confidence and inspiration to actually try to work their brain in new ways, that they don't have to be a victim of what they had up until that point. So it's a really exciting place to be.
Exactly. I mean, as I said, in your personal brand, I mean, I believe that a personal brand is who you were, who you are, and who you're going to be. And just because you came from a certain environment doesn't mean that you're fixed there. You can always learn from your experiences. Exactly. You can always change. You can always, adapt based on your on the environment that's put in front of you. So, we have the ability to lifelong learn, and I think that that's a really important idea for everybody to think about. That it doesn't matter if you're 6 years old or 60 years old. If you want to change, there is the ability to do that. If there's something in part of your life that you're not happy with, fix it. And and it may not be easy, and it may not be something that you can do simply, but the opportunity is there.
It is to learn, exactly. And I think just in terms of brand too, I think that for me, where I'm sinking more deeply into my own brand, which I don't even think about it as branding or strategy.
Sure.
I'm owning who I am on a really authentic and very confident level. That's
huge.
Increasing. And a big part of that is changing that inner language. So owning that I love being a nerd. I love science. So if my logo is a brain, that's who I am. That was actually my nickname in elementary school. It was called the Brain.
Cool.
And so owning it, not being ashamed that I love books. I love being myself and reading huge, massive volumes of books, owning that. But then also owning the soft part of me too, because I think that, I've been trying to do this dance of like, loving the science, but I have a very soft part to my personality of loving ability and intimacy and that real deep social connection with people, not by quantity, by quality. And so actually, even if you look at my logo, it's a brain, but it's got this soft smile with the closed eyes. Like it's almost like a meditative. So, and that kind of just organically, I didn't push that. It just organically, as I owned more and more pieces of myself and I accepted these pieces that are just who I am. And I especially know when it's really, really me, when I did it when I was 5. Like I even had my own radio, we have a really bad word that we used in Canada for it. I'm not going to say it, but it was that tape recorder system.
Yeah.
And you record your voice, right?
Yeah.
And so I even created my own radio shows called NERD Nerd Radio. So, like those are all things I did when I was young. And I've heard that from other people, that to look back to, what really you just love doing when you were a kid and see if those things can pop out, because that really actually helped in terms of branding in that sense of really, I loved the Little Prince. I love little anime, and so that kind of started to just organically happen as I owned more of those pieces, or re-owned actually, just acknowledged, not owned, but acknowledge those pieces of myself. So you have to embrace your multi-dimensional self. We're all multi-dimensional. We all have, we're not just one thing. We don't fit in one box.
We all fit in a number of boxes depending on who we are, where we are that day, and the people that we're around, and celebrate that. You know, that's a key thing to celebrate. So, Stefanie, I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. My last question, I ask everybody this, as you know, because it's an important question. When you leave a meeting and you walk out the door and you get in your car and you drive away, what's the one thing that you want people to think about you and Zarif, and how you can make them better?
That's a nice question. I would say that I actually don't want them thinking about me. I want them thinking about their ability to try something new. That nothing is fixed and eternal, and that whatever they believe is something that they should be giving up on, or that there's no hope, that there might be one other thing they could just try that might create change, that change is possible. So actually, it's interesting you asked that. I actually don't want them thinking about me, because then what would happen is, if they're thinking, oh, Stefanie's so great, or she's whatever, it pulls the spotlight away from them and has them thinking, oh, but see, she's that way, so she's able to inspire change. I'm not like that. I would want it to be that they're really thinking about, wow, like, oh, I remember those amazing things about myself, those totally fascinating pieces of me that I want to bring into the picture. So that's, hope that change is possible.
And that's great.
Yeah.
Because it is. Change is always possible. It's just, you know, it may take some work. It may take some soul searching. It may take looking at the ugly side of your underbelly. But you know what?
Yeah.
We are all made up of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that we always have to be that way. We can always change. We can always find a better way, and we can always make a better us. You know, and that's what needs to be celebrated.
Yeah. And to notice those tiny, I always call it the micro progress. The micro movements of progress that happen. They might not be giant leaps, and we might not be able to compare ourselves to a standard or somebody else, but within ourselves, there might be these tiny little micro progresses that we need to acknowledge for ourselves.
Absolutely. Stefanie, you have been an absolutely wonderful guest. Hang out in the green room for a second. I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody, and I will be right back.
Okay, thanks.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Stefanie. You know, the work that she's doing is extremely important. It may be education-based. It may be stuff that's just going on in schools, but it applies to business as well. The more we can take on a growth mindset, the more that we can sit there and look at the possibilities and look at the future and say, just because things are this way today doesn't mean it have to be that way tomorrow. And figure out how to make those little changes to make things better. That's how companies grow. That's how companies succeed. That's how businesses thrive. And I think the lessons that Stefanie gave us were really pertinent. Well, once again, my name is Ben Baker. My company is Your Brand Marketing. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, we consult, we provide workshops, and we speak on brand, message, market, vision, and value. We want to find out who you are, what you do, why you do it, and why people should care. Come talk to us. Come see us next week on the YourLIVINGBrand.live show. Every Wednesday, 10 o'clock Pacific, we'll be here. We'd love you to join us. Have a great day.